Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Monahan, and I'm a communications strategist here at the Ohio Arts Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Make Your Marketing More Accessible. Now, before I introduce our presenter, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. This just helps to cut down on any feedback issues during the presentation. So if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box in your control panel, and we'll incorporate those questions throughout the webinar, and there will be plenty of time for questions at the end as well. If you're having audio issues or trouble connecting, we recommend refreshing your browser, and if that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on our YouTube channel by the end of business on Friday, January 18th, tomorrow. So if you aren't able to catch the entire live session or you'd like to listen again, you'll be able to find it there. All right, that takes care of all of the housekeeping items. So now on to the main presentation. With us today is Erin Hoppe, the Executive Director of VSA Ohio, the state organization on arts and disability. VSA Ohio's mission is to make the arts and arts education more accessible and inclusive for people with any disability and their support networks. And in keeping with that mission, Erin is here today to share strategies to ensure that your marketing is accessible to people with all kinds of disabilities. So thank you so much for being here, Erin. I'll let you take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Katie. Thanks to the Ohio Arts Council for offering these webinar series. I'm very honored to be with all of you this afternoon, virtually anyway. Thanks so much for taking time today. So we have a few things to get to today, and there's a lot of information on the screen, so you probably will not have time to write it all down. But the great thing about the YouTube video is that you can go to it and pause it, or you could contact me directly, and I'm happy to email you a copy of the PowerPoint at the end. So just take notes around the things on the screen. So we're going to do a poll question, and we're going to go through some tips that I've put together. This is not a comprehensive. We're going to get to what we can in 1 hour. I wish that I had been able to ask all of you for your photographs so I could see who's with me today, but just this is who's talking to you from downtown Columbus today. So I want to start with a poll question and ask, which of these statements best describes you? I'm the only marketing person, I'm part of a marketing team, I am in charge of marketing, and I'm here to pass information on to colleagues, or you're just not really sure how you ended up here, which I hope isn't one, but please take a second just so we can kind of get an idea.
All right, we'll give it just a few more seconds here so everyone get your poll in. Blend it in 5 more. It looks like we're waiting on just a few more people. All right, we will close it. And this is what we're working with. Looks like the majority of people are part of a team.
That's good. Yeah, that's good to have a team. Everything takes a team, but if you're the only person, don't worry, you're not alone either. I'm also in charge of marketing and have a small team that helps me, but we're all in this together, and you'll find out throughout this that a lot of the resources that you need exist online and are there for you to help you, and hopefully as you begin to weave these things in, make your life easy as well, easier. There's some good tips. So I wanted to share with you a few statistics about market power. So if you are a working age person with a disability in America, the total disposable income for this group is $490 billion. If you take out from that all of those things like rent that are, we have to pay, when it comes to discretionary income for working people with disabilities, that is about $21 billion. And we're all trying to get, I know we all offer a lot of free programs, but we're really trying to be part of how people decide to spend their money. To give you a little bit of context, when you look at the African American population, their discretionary income is $3 billion, and Hispanics is 16 billion. So people with disabilities have a pretty big market share. If you saw the video promoting this webinar, you'll also know that 66% of consumers will purchase goods and services from business that features people with disability in their advertising. And even more, 78% of consumers will purchase goods and services from a business that is taking steps to ensure easy access for people with disabilities. And if you want to step back a little bit from there, think about how big the market potential is when you consider the friends and family members, caregivers, colleagues, and other consumers that are connected to people with disabilities. So there's a big audience out there. And we've always in our world talk about underserved audiences, and disability is part of that underserved audience. So let's kind of get into it. Oh, I do have for you a few examples. If any of you saw over the holidays the new Microsoft commercial on the left, that they came out with a new game controller that is adaptable and universal, and people with different mobility issues can still use that controller. It was designed for them. And so it's a great commercial of this kid. Everybody's rushing over to his house to see him break the record. And you could also, so this is a featured product that Microsoft is promoting as something that they want everyone to know about. If you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that Swiffer is advertising accessibility for every day. No excuse not to clean. Everyone can clean with a Swiffer, and it shows how their tool becomes more adaptable and helps people with different mobility needs or be able to still use their product. So that's some pretty exciting stuff that's happening. These larger corporations are understanding this market power and are really beginning to market directly to people with disabilities and their loved ones. So the first tip I want to share is to get to know your audience. Like any other initiative that you're doing, you might be doing an exhibit on a certain minority group, or you might have a performance featuring African American stories and histories. And when you're doing your marketing and your programming, you're of course getting to know your audience, right? They're part of that. And so you're going to do that for people with disabilities too. One thing that you might know or not is that 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. That's a lot of people in our communities that have different abilities and different needs to be able to participate. So I'm just going to share with you, I'm not going to spend long on this slide, but just to show you that there are a lot of different types of disabilities, from physical, vision, hearing, mobility, to some of those hidden or internal ones, intellectual, developmental, chronic health issues as well is part of this, this field. And the purpose of this is to really talk to you about how one size does not fit all. Within disability, there's a huge range of capacity and of need. This is one example. It's a very, very small example to show you how a visual disability can be different from person to person. So you might have complete blurry, you might have spots or tunnel vision, or you might be colorblind. Even within the mobility, if you have a mobility need, the types of adaptive equipment that you'll use, from wheelchairs to walkers to canes and crutches, there's a significant range of options that are out there. So different wheelchairs provide different services, different disabilities need different types of wheelchairs. And so it's just this real range. You may also be thinking about hidden disabilities if you're thinking about learning disabilities, epilepsy, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is I won't leave the screen on this for long, but a computer person with more technology experience than me helped to create this GIF of what it's like for them to try to read with their dyslexia. And so we don't really know, we couldn't tell that from anyone by looking at them, but they have a real difficult, I mean, you can read it, but it's a very difficult thing to do. And so that is to say that we don't want to say, this is what we're going to do and you can do it, but you want to be open to different needs and be flexible and be working towards that universal design as you're moving forward. So the next tip is to really think about, I mean, and we'll get to brochures and, you know, all that kind of stuff, but in-person marketing is a real thing. Once you get them in the door, anybody in the door, you want them to have a great experience. And I'm sure, you know, those of you with frontline staff and small staffs are always thinking about customer service. And of course, you're promoting it and you want everybody to come in and have a great time. But this is particularly important for people with disabilities who might be asking you for something that's beyond what everybody else is asking for. And so you really just want to, you know, have that clear, honest communication and not treat somebody like a burden for asking you for an accommodation. This is something we can and should and must do. And so don't let people ask you for things, right? So just a little bit of that customer service etiquette, you know, we really want to be addressing people as people. If somebody's asking for help, if you want to know, wait for them to respond. Don't just begin to talk for them. Always speak directly to a person with a disability. If you have somebody who's there with an interpreter, don't talk to the interpreter. If you have somebody who has a cognitive disability, you could still talk to them and should talk to them and not just default to asking their parents or whoever they're with for the information. Don't just continue to repeat something if it's clear that you're not being understood. Find a different way to say it. And I think also the respecting personal space is a very important one. And that includes adaptive equipment. So those wheelchairs, walkers, canes, service animals, that is all technically considered adaptive equipment, and that belongs to that person and is part of that person. So please don't ever there's no just grabbing someone's wheelchair and pushing them along, that kind of a thing. I think knowing the accessible routes and spaces are very important so that if somebody asks you for a question, you can get them there in the easiest way. That whole remembering that many disabilities cannot be seen. So if somebody asks you for something, you know, we don't want to be thinking, well, you don't look like you have a disability, right? It doesn't matter. They're telling you what they need. And then don't go into that shouting or talking louder or pretending to understand someone. We don't want to make assumptions and we don't want to make decisions for people. We want to ask them what they need to participate. And we'll get into some of that phrasing and how you can do that in a short bit. And I think that this is really important when it comes to writing your copy. So language definitely matters. Language matters every day to every person. You don't want to be labeled. I don't want to be labeled. You can label yourself, but I don't want anyone to tell me, you know, who I am and to use different phrases that are not progressive and not helpful or respectful. So one of your first resources to take a look at is the National Center on Disability and Journalism. And they have a huge listing that is intended specifically for journalists, communication professionals who are looking for appropriate and accurate language to use when you're writing and talking about people living with disabilities. They also have on their website terms to avoid when writing about disability. So you don't ever want to say somebody is wheelchair confined or handicapped. I mean, somebody uses a wheelchair. They're not confined to anything, right? So if somebody has paraplegia, they're not paraplegic because we are all people first. And there might be something about us that impacts our life, that changes it, but that does not mean that we're not people first. So you want to be really respectful with the language when you're writing about it. Okay, marketing in your space, I think, is also part of that. I have a slide on wayfinding as well. If any of you have ever been to the Ohio Arts Council's offices, you know what it's like to park downtown, to try to find your way to the Rhodes Tower, to get through security, to get into the right elevator, to get up, to know which way to go. I mean, it can be very complicated, and all of your spaces have different things about them. So we can make it easier for people to navigate and to feel comfortable, so that you're really helping everyone find their way and not get frustrated as they try to, pardon me, go through your space. On the right here is just, I had the opportunity to travel this fall, and this was at an airport in Spain, and it had right on it, you know, sin barreras means without barriers. And so without barriers, you know, they've got these universal symbols for wheelchair and mobility, for hearing needs, for wayfinding. And I have not seen this symbol anywhere else, but the bottom left yellow, I believe is for mental or other disabilities like that, because it's got the sad face and the happy face. So if you have a hidden disability, then you can still get help through this kiosk, right? And so I started to talk about wayfinding, but it's really, you know, if you're going to market a special event that you're having. I was just in Akron at the Akron Civic Theater 2 days ago, and the entire main street for like 3 blocks is torn up with construction. And that is heavily impacting the way that people can get into and park and access their space. So they're creating updates on their website on a regular basis with where to park, how to get in, how to find alternate doors so that you can still get in. We always think about parking, but what are other transportation options that you can promote? Are you on a bus line? A lot of people with disabilities use the bus. Well, a lot of people use the bus. Is there bike parking? Or do you have a drop-off location where people can pick up a ride share or take a taxi to? What's the entry of your space like? If it's pretty tight, you know, if I'm coming in with a wheelchair and friends, am I going to be able to navigate, or is there a better way to get in? Really thinking about your signage and maps, and we'll get into that accessible design for that types of signage, but it just becomes a much more pleasant experience for people when they're not struggling to find the way. We've all had that moment where we've parked and we're running and trying to get there, and we're 10 minutes late because we couldn't find the door, you know, whatever it's to. And we really want to try to minimize that and be thinking about how people with disabilities are able to get to your space as well with different mobility. If you have a parking lot with handicap spaces, wheelchair spaces, you know, are those spaces actually towards the front, or are you going to park and still have another 300 yards to go or traverse or go across the street or something like that? I don't know how to fix your parking issues and concerns at all, but you can be very transparent with people so that they know what to prepare for. All right. My tip number 3 is to write an access statement. This woman here speaking is Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith. She's the founder of the VSA National Network. And has just done a lot around accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities in the arts and culture. And so an access statement, what is that? This is telling your audiences what and who you stand for, right? You probably have a diversity statement or diversity initiatives that are going on right now, and disability should be part of that. But also, you know, make a real accessibility statement when it comes to disability. It does not need to be long. In fact, it should be pretty brief. You know, I have an example on the next page. You want to make it people first. You want to check that copy from the resource that I just shared. You don't want to be, you know, you don't want to say disabled or handicapped or things like that. This is for people who have different accessibility needs to participate in your opportunities. And you really want to market it, make it available in a lot of places. Put it on your brochures, put it on your website, put it on your registration forms. This is a welcome, this is a way to say you are welcome here, and we want to hear from you what you need. Here's things that we're doing, but you need to tell us what you need so that we can help you with that. And we want you to live and work by your statement. You know, if you put it out there, and somebody asks for something, you know, then you need to follow through with that. Don't put up something that you don't really mean or don't feel like you have the capacity to do. And it is always good practice to involve people with disabilities. If 1 in 5 Americans has a disability, and I ask the question, how many of you know someone with a disability? 95% of you will raise your hand to say that you know someone with a disability, and they're in your community, they're on your board, they're in your volunteer corps, hopefully they're in your staff somewhere too, right? And so bring in your community members to help you with this process. There's an old disability slogan that says nothing about us without us, and that's because nobody wants to be spoken for, they want to be spoken with and part of the discussion and at the table. So here are just a couple of examples. The top one is our own. We're committed to providing excellent experiences, engaging the broadest possible audiences, and breaking down barriers to participation. We list specific accommodations for each program. Requests for other professional services should be made at least 2 weeks in advance. For all questions, contact Erin Hoppy. There's my phone number and email if you want to get in touch with me. Because it's really important, it's really nice to have that contact there so that I know that I'm reaching out to Erin and not just sending my email into cyberspace and hoping that the right person finds it. Again, right here, so I say you make your professional service request at least 2 weeks in advance. If somebody were to ask me for something, you know, within that time frame, I would be making every effort to make that happen, but this will help provide more seamless access. You can't pull an ASL interpreter out of the air. You know, you need to find out who those people are in advance so that you have them in your Rolodex, but it's okay to set policies like this as well. We could spend a whole session talking about policies, but these policies are there to help you and to help people as well. And then the Cincinnati Art Museum strives for inclusivity by increasing accessibility to its collections, programming, and resources. They seek to eliminate barriers by accommodating the individual needs of all of their visitors. They offer a wide variety of tours and programs, making our collection more accessible. For more information regarding accessibility, visit our information page. And indeed, you can go there and scroll down and see all of the different types of accessibility initiatives that they're offering. And if you have more questions, I believe there's a contact there as well. So this is just really something that's going to help you wave the flag that say, we want you to be here. We understand that you might need something else to participate, and we want to help you make that happen so that we can welcome you through our doors. All right, audit your outlets. Now, you could do a full organizational audit regarding accessibility, and I talked about that in Akron earlier this week, and there are lots of resources out there, and that is another like half-day session, but we're talking about marketing today. So I want you to think about your information outlets. Every single place where you are conveying information is probably going to need some kind of tweak or consideration or thinking about the different ways that it's presented that may or may not be less accessible. From the mailings you do, to where you sell your tickets, to your concessions, your web, we'll get into digital and website in a little bit, your emails. We'll also get into social media later. Videos, all of it, anytime you're talking to someone on the phone, when you're interacting with people on an individual level, there's a lot of ways that we convey information, and not everybody can see you or hear you or understand you. And so how can we think about different ways to do that, to convey that information? And there are a number of alternative formats that exist. I'm glad you asked. So anything from increasing to the font size for large print, to thinking about digital documents that we'll get to, open and closed captioning. You know, maybe we're providing audio alternatives for text. Maybe we're providing print versions of audio material. Braille is certainly still there. ASL, American Sign Language, is definitely an alternative format, but not everybody who is deaf or has hearing loss uses American Sign Language. And so you may say, well, okay, we're going to do ASL interpreted performances. But if somebody does not use ASL, then that's not really very helpful to them. Maybe they would prefer something like a CART transcription service, which is like one of those live, like if you've seen the TV shows and they're in the courtroom and the person is typing very quickly to write down everything that's being said. Well, it's the same thing, but it's on the screen, right? So this is just to show you that we want to think about the different ways that people perceive and understand information, and that just writing something down in a document and posting it somewhere does not necessarily mean that everyone can access it. So you can do it the way you're doing it, but then include something that allows people to contact you to ask for more. This plain, clear language is a really important thing. I'm sure many of you write a lot all the time. I know, I write a lot of grants, I write reports, and there's a different type of, there's different writing styles for everything. And this more simple and plain and clear that you can make something, the easier it's going to be for people with different intellectual capacities, or maybe English is not their first language. They will be able to access it better than if you write. If you can say something in 5 words instead of 10, I encourage the 5 words. That last tip there was to use images, right? For lots of reasons. So pictographs help everyone. We all send emojis or post emojis or use smiley faces. And there's a reason that those are very popular, is because they're universal. Most of you can figure out that on the top left part of this screen, there's a sun with an arrow down and a sun with an arrow up. You might figure that that means sunset and sunrise. We know that's an airplane. I know that's a lamp and an elephant, right? And on the right is actually, Apple is in the process of releasing some new emojis. I'm not sure the exact release date, but they are adding different accessibility or disability components to their emojis. Everybody wants to see themselves represented on screens and in our pop culture. And this is one way that Apple is trying to include that. And even within theirs, you can see that they have 2 different types of wheelchairs included, right? And 2 different types of service animals that are included. So they're trying to do that. And this is going to help a lot of different people. And it draws your attention, right? You can look at a big line, a page of text, but you're going to look first at probably the image. And so it can help you draw people's attention to important things. Okay. So these are sort of these informal pictographs, but there are also accessibility symbols that have been specifically designed by a group called the Graphic Artists Guild. You can Google them. You can use this link right here to see. I think there's about 9 or 10 of them that have been developed for the most common disabilities and for the most common accommodations and adaptations that exist. We all know that a question mark means I have a question, I need information, this is where I go. So even if you don't use any of the others, you can always include a question mark next to your contact information. And people may not, you don't even then have to write contact, right? You can just put the question mark and you can say, what is it, a picture says 1,000 words? You can say a lot with a picture. When you get to the Graphic Artists Guild and you start to bring on different symbols and you're thinking about design, and you're like, oh, I don't know, this doesn't really look good, this doesn't fit, our space, tweak it to match your brand. On the bottom of the screen there, we worked with Summer Jam West a little bit last year to work on accessibility for their annual festival, and you can see the 2, well, there's just kind of 3 examples here, but they took these images and changed the color to match their brand, right? They took off the square and they added, they made it purple because that's their brand, and you can do that too. We'll talk about color contrast in a little bit. But there's no excuse for saying that universal design or accessible design is not attractive. You can make it attractive to fit your standards or your brand with a little bit of foreplanning, right? You don't want to say there's no way that we can fit this information in there. When you're in charge of putting that piece together or part of the team that's putting that piece together, you can make space for it from the beginning. Easier to do it from the beginning than to try to add it on later. And here are some of the other examples. So that top row is a selection of those official access symbols from the Graphic Artists Guild. We've got assistive listening, ASL, audio description, Braille, and TTY phones, which are still a thing that's happening, absolutely. And then the bottom are sort of some symbols that VSA Ohio and some of the other organizations that we work with have started using. Sensory friendly is, of course, if you're providing a sensory friendly performance, or you build a sensory room, something like that. The dot next to it, we all know from our phones, means location, so it helps with a map. I discussed CART, the real-time translation. That's a symbol that I found. If you're thinking about sensory issues, and now I would say that VSA Ohio's events, we now advertise all of them as fragrance-free. And we in our communications with folks, we request that people refrain from wearing strong perfumes or lotions because there are definitely people who are very sensitive to that. If you go through the mall and go to the candle store, you know that it can be a very intense experience. Or if you get into an elevator and somebody comes in and it feels like they put the whole bottle of cologne on them, it can be very intense. And it might just be an annoyance or an irritant to you, but for some people it can really cause some medical issues. The other one on the right is a food sensitivity and allergy. We're now used to restaurants having, many of them now include vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, which you can be thinking about for your spaces as well. But they're all, you name a word, and if you want to Google or Bing it and say, what's the image for not thinking of it right now, for X, you can go online and find an image for it and find one that's, available to the public for use, and then tweak it yourself. And it's really going to help all kinds of different people access that information. I didn't have on the first slide that probably the most common one that that wheelchair symbol, and it was on the left. So in the one in the middle is what you know the most. It's on parking spaces, it's all over the place. The one on the left was actually the very first universal symbol of accessibility. There was a competition back in the mid-20th century to design this, and you may be noticing, oh my God, it's missing a head. And you can imagine how somebody with a disability might feel that they're represented as not even having a head. That lasted for about 10 years before they introduced the one in the middle that we all know. And then the one on the right is sort of a new one that's been happening. And it's, the one in the middle is your legally what you should do if you have, parking spaces, things like that. The one on the right can be a little more informal. You'll note that the person who's using the wheelchair seems to have some more action in what they're doing. They're not just static and sitting there. They're going somewhere, they're doing something. There's a few different versions of it back in the back screen. It's its own interesting story, the process of how that was created. And if you, search the internet for this title here, you can read a very interesting article about the artists who designed that image. But I highly encourage you to be using all of these images at all touch points in your marketing. All right. So I made that, I'll ask a question in a second. So I made the comment that 66% of consumers will purchase services from a business featuring people with disability in their advertising. The important part of this is to be authentic, right? You don't want to just go grab images from the internet that has somebody in a wheelchair or something like that and put it on yours. Now you want to have your own images of people participating in your programs and things like that. Now you may say, we don't have those pictures, we don't know. I mean, so I think there's a process of going back to look through your archives to see if you do have images that include people with different abilities in your images that you can use. And if you don't have those, then I would suggest two things. One, I would say have some intentionality going forward. You don't want to go up to somebody and say, hey, you're using a wheelchair. I want to take your picture so that we can, put you on our brochure. But you can kind of your photographers can kind of be, on the lookout and, try to frame pictures with that intentionality. And so recognizing that diversity within your audiences. So I said authenticity and now I'm saying staging. I think that if you're working with an accessibility committee, if you're working with people with disabilities to help, to provide some feedback or that are part of programs, I would have a conversation with them and say, we're really trying to show some diversity in our programming and in our advertising. And so, is it cool if we have you, looking at this exhibit or whatever it may be? And I think that if you're having, a conversation with them and not talking about, say, we don't want to make you the token. We just want to show people that we want to welcome everyone. I think people would be willing to work with you on that. All right, I will actually pause for a second and see, Katie, if there have been any questions that came in. I've been going a little fast, so.
Yeah, lots of great information. I just wanted to remind everyone that if you do have a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box in your control panel, and we will, incorporate those throughout. Right now, it looks like we are okay, so you can continue rolling along, but I'll let you know if anything pops up.
Yeah, sure. That's okay. Sometimes I get nervous to ask questions in front of a group as well. I'm sure Katie would be anonymous, but if you have a specific question about, we're doing this and this, I'm happy to answer them. That's no problem. What's happening?
Did have a shout out that says thanks for the Summer Jam West picture. So that.
Hey, Patty. Or Alan, one of the two.
See, this is anonymous.
I know, great.
So.
Yeah, good. All right. So I want to talk to you about actually adapting your designs. So there are standards that exist for accessible design that you can look into. Actually, the 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design is what you would search for. It's in Chapter 7. A lot of it is somewhat related to actual signage, but there are some good tips in there as well otherwise. So it's going to look at font sizing, spacing between letters and characters, color contrast, which we'll get into, the placement of signs, things like that. And one of the things that I really want to say, two things. So one is I will say that be encouraged to use sans serif fonts. Those other scripty fonts are just not accessible in the way that we would hope. I know that everybody, when it comes to galas and we want to look fancy and all these things, but you can still have a great design without having to use these fonts that are really difficult to read. If we're thinking about the people who are already in our spaces, we're thinking about our baby boomer population, our aging population, whether or not you're born with a disability or you acquire a disability, if you age long enough, your vision, your hearing, your mobility, your cognition, they're going to change as well. So our visitors now who are, there's a big difference of different capacities when you're 65 and when you're 85. And that is not to say 85-year-olds are not spry and out and about and doing all kinds of things. My grandma is as well, and she, you know, nothing stops her. But we can make her experience easier, right? And the one thing that I will suggest is that you print in matte instead of glossy. I even have a hard time sometimes when things are glossy and I have to, you know, I'm looking under the fluorescent lights of my office. It just kind of creates this uncomfortable glare, but matte is much easier for everyone to read. It's not to say you cannot do glossy. I'm not here to tell you do this, don't do this, but try experimenting with it and see, you know, if you can wrap these in. Large print is a very big, is a nice accommodation for people. I'm not going to go over all of these things. If you go to American Council of the Blind, they have a whole section on large print where most of these tips came from. It's about using larger fonts, using those sans serif fonts, increasing line spacing, not enlarging on copiers. That's just going to distort it and just, you know, ruin the whole reason you're doing it. Not using all caps, which kind of start to run together. And then this is the access symbol that you would use if you're offering large print. You do not, so I will say, I'm sure that all of you are wary of your budgets. You do not have to print an equal number of large print programs or whatever it may be to whatever you're doing. But it's very nice to have some available for people who ask for it. And though actually I'll tell you, when we put out our programs and our large print programs next to them, a lot of people gravitate towards that larger print and take that instead of the other, right? So there's a high demand for, you know, encouragement to use, even if you're not, you know, using this official large print, you can still opt for a font size more like 12 instead of 8. Or something like that. I know we're always thinking about page counts and how, you know, adding an extra 4 pages to a program adds X amount more dollars. But there are ways that you can kind of wrap that in and just not, you know, make people need a magnifying glass to be able to read it, especially if you're in a theater and it's dark, you know, or the lighting is down low. It's much easier if it's a larger print. So they're sort of somewhere in between that 8 print, the 8-point font, 10-point font, and 18-point font. I want to also, you know, encourage you to be thinking about just general accessible design. Lighthouse International has some really great resources on it. Thinking particularly about color contrast. If you're looking down at the box on the right, even if if it didn't say effective, not as effective, we can all see that blue on top of yellow is much more easy to distinguish than orange on top of yellow. You don't want to do things like white fonts on top of yellow or orange, or if you're using a blue, if it's a light blue, then white might not be as accessible as black font, or if it's a darker blue, then you might want white font instead of black font. There are ways to explore that color contrast to kind of get an idea. And when you're ready, you can use a color contrast checker. So I'm not telling you to change your brand colors, or you probably have, you know, these are our 5 colors, we use them in different ways, but you can put your, you know, your RGB numbers in here and use this color contrast checker to see which ones go well with each other. You know, are we going to use the white here, the black here, that kind of a thing. So just pop them in. It takes hardly no time at all, and these are free also. So use them as a resource for that color contrast. All right, digital. This is a big one. So videos, are they captioned? I was at a social media discussion last week, and the woman was saying, you know, we always caption our videos because often I'm, you know, in a public place or at work or, you know, on the couch at home and the TV's on and you don't want to have this video go. And so you're looking for those captions at the bottom. And if there's no captions, I tend to scroll on because I usually don't want to hear anything, you know, that's coming through on the videos. So caption, caption, caption. The other component of that is for vision, right? So if you saw the post that Ohio Arts Council did about this video and the webinar series, they say in the post, text and image descriptions can be read in the comment section. In the comment section, there's a full text. It took me, I did it, I would say it took me 10 to 15 minutes, 1 minute per slide that flashed by. And because there's no sound, there is sound to this video, but it's all music. So if you are blind or have low vision, it will mean nothing to you except that there's some nice music playing. So it goes in to say, you know, the slide says why accessible marketing matters, and then there's a short description of a close-up on the enter keyboard key with the word accessibility and wheelchair logo, which is this one right here. It was behind it. So it doesn't take long, but people who are blind or have vision loss are going to be very appreciative of the fact that you're putting this information in the bottom. So you want to think about those senses and how they're interacting with your information. I don't know how to caption my videos. Well, don't you worry, there's a way to caption. I'm actually gonna give a shout out to Ohio Dance and their team that's developing their virtual dance collection. They actually typed up this, this captioning on YouTube how-to. I will not go through it all, but again, this is where you go back. You can email me for a copy of this, or you can pause it on the OAC's YouTube channel on how to caption your videos in YouTube. It's not that hard. It does take a little time. It can be you, it can be, you know, your interns or your volunteers. You just kind of have to go through it, but it's really going to enhance the accessibility of what people are looking at. I have also heard that there are, I have not used one personally, but I heard somebody talking about you can send your video to service providers and they will caption it for you. I think it was a charge, but you know, they charged by the minute of your video, not by the minutes it takes them. So just go out, you can, you know, search online for captioning services, but it's really going to enhance the way people interact with your films. Oh, but all of our stuff is on Vimeo. Worry not, because this shows you how to add that captioning onto Vimeo from that file that you got from YouTube. So you can have your videos accessible on Vimeo as well. Document accessibility is a really big deal. So Braille, everybody thinks about Braille, like if you're blind, we're gonna get Braille for you. You know, Braille is still in use, absolutely, definitely, but it is not as popular anymore, and that's because of digital. And if I get, you know, your document I might just want you to send me your document with text only, and then I'll put it into my computer and I will listen to it with my software. And you can make documents more or less accessible, and it's super easy to do. So this was in PowerPoint, but it's across Microsoft Office Suite. And you'll go to the info and down to check for issues, click that button and it'll say check for accessibility. And then it will take you through slide by slide or header by header or whatever type of document you're on to tell you how to make it more accessible. It's going to look for things like alt text for images, meaningful hyperlinks, sufficient contrast. They really like when you use the built-in headers that Microsoft offers, so that somebody using a screen reader can just jump from section to section and doesn't have to read everything that you have said, you know, in chapter 1, but you could jump to chapter 2 or whatever it may be. It'll walk you right through everything, and when you're done, you get an all set, you're done, accessible message. Same thing. There are a lot of ways to make your PDFs more accessible. So you all know, you've all probably tried to copy and paste from PDFs for various reasons. And sometimes you can, sometimes more successfully than others. And sometimes it's like, it's just a picture of the image. So here's some steps on how to use Acrobat Pro. Just again, it'll walk you right through it. It's an access wizard. And it will go ahead and do a check of your PDF to see how accessible it is. Websites. There are lots of different things you can do, even if you just have a small website. You don't have to necessarily go redesign it at this point in time. Maybe the next time you redesign your website, you're going to think about accessibility as part of that. But it's really, so we're looking at accessibility on the web so that people can perceive, understand, navigate, interact, and contribute to your information. And that's taking into consideration all these different types of disabilities. So here are just a few things that if you're not redesigning right now, you can do. Go in and alt text your images. Just put a simple description. So for here, I would say a circle with lines and a black circle with lines and the letters www through the middle horizontally. Or donate here if you have a donate button, because if somebody's using a screen reader and your image is not alt texted, it means nothing to them. It's just a black box. Use things like hyperlink a descriptive phrase instead of click here or more. Not only is click here really confusing for screen readers, but using it, hyperlinking a descriptive phrase tends to draw the eye more than click here and more. If you are interested in how accessible your website is, you can use a service provider, so Knowbility or the Web Accessibility Initiative. Often they do come with some small fees. There are some checkers online where you can kind of go in and put your page in and it'll send you a report back. But depending on how much capacity you have with your website, there are some different tips here. You also want to put accessibility on your website. This is the website to the People's House, to the Ohio State House, and they have that access statement at the top. And then they list all of their different offerings. You can include policies. You can include the contact. You want to market it. You want to promote the great work that you're doing and say, hey, yeah, we're thinking about accessibility. And we're thinking about your needs, and you want to make it easy to find and intuitive to find. So either the about section or the visit section, something like that, so that people can find it. You don't have to click 10 times to try to find accessibility. And my guess is that a lot of people will use that page to understand more about what you're offering and what they can expect when they get to your space.
Hey, Erin.
Social media, I'm not an expert. Yeah.
I interrupt for just one moment while we're still on the website portion. We did have a question come through when you talked about not having links open in new windows. Can you explain a little bit why that is?
Sure. I mean, the basic short is that if somebody is using a screen reader like our software like JAWS, if a link opens in a new window, it doesn't notify the user that a new window has been opened. And so they might click it and then remain on your page and then not know. So the workaround there is if you don't want people to leave your website and you want to open, you can put underneath it when, link opens in new window really briefly, so that you're letting somebody know that either, you'd be clicking and I'm like, I'm still on your page. What's going on? It's not taking me anywhere. And at the meantime, they have 10 new windows. So encourage to not force you to open in new windows, but if you are, just kind of put in that, or if you're using the alt text for your image, and that's going to take you, by clicking that image, it takes you to a new page. then you can do that description and say clicking will take you to a new page, to a new window.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Does that help?
Was so helpful. Yeah, I think that got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. For social media, I'm not an expert there, but there are experts out there. I want to point you towards Sina Baram, who's a web accessibility researcher. He's got, I think, a couple of different sites that he manages, and he has a ton of information about web accessibility, so you can sort of go and mine that for more information from him. On Twitter, you can enable image descriptions. So if you post an image, you know, you say whatever about our event, and then there's an image. Unless it has some kind of description to it, then again, people who have vision loss are not going to see that as anything interesting to them, and they may just scroll right by. But there's a process to go through to enable image descriptions. And if you're, you know, I know Twitter has increased its character limit, but your description of your image can be up to 420 characters. So you can really include a lot more information there for somebody who's trying to figure out more what you're doing. There are also, Twitter has @TwitterA11Y, which stands for accessibility, and they post new tips and things that they're launching on Twitter accessibility on a regular basis there. Accessibility in Facebook is a little less of the same. So this just kind of harkens back to when we posted the OAC video, or the webinar video, and then we put that image down below. So just trying to include a visual description in the post when you can. And then, you know, kind of making some consistent notes. So you could do a post that says, you know, we're going to include image descriptions. Every time we include an image description, it will be in the comments and signified with alt equals. People know what alt equals is, and then you can just kind of do that. Again, they don't have to be super long audio, you know, full descriptions of the images, but it helps people just have a better understanding about what, you know, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to convey, the messages, the images that you're conveying. The last thing I'm going to talk about with a few minutes left is spreading the word, talking to people and letting them know what you're doing. So this is a sign on the door of COSI. It's got "You all are welcome here" in a dozen different languages. And then at the bottom, you can see that it even has the ASL, all are welcome here, symbols for the different letters there. Make an accessibility brochure. When you have, I'm going to show you Columbus Children's Theaters, but it could be, you know, a small wrap card that you have to advertise what you have, where you're putting that statement, providing those details and policies, putting that contact information in. And you want, again, another thing that you want to make it easy to access. So if in your entryway you have a whole section of marketing materials, you want to put that right there with it. Because anybody could pick it up at any time. I might not have a disability, but I might have a brother who has cerebral palsy, and now I know more about accessibility at your theater and what we can expect. So do it, put it out there. I'll just give you a peek of the inside. So they start with a statement. They really jump into these images that are all, you know, branded the same for them. They have pictures, and then they have descriptions of what each of these different accommodation means, so that people know what to expect with that. They even have this summary of performances and what, you know, what's happening for each performance. So it's a really great way to raise awareness about yourself and what you're doing, and get people interested in your offerings and really promoting this initiative that you're doing. Find your partners and people. Word of mouth is very important in the disability community, whether or not I had a good or not good experience. The disability field is huge. There are service organizations in every corner of this state. Spend some time and develop your list of people to contact and talk to, or of people to send information to when you are doing new initiatives. Every county has a board of developmental disabilities that you can get in touch with. You know, there's dozens, hundreds of people that work at county boards, and they're always trying to find opportunities for their community member or for their constituents to participate in the community. Do a press release. If you have a great new initiative or a specific exhibit, or you're launching a new access portion to your website, whatever it may be, promote the heck out of it. I'm sorry this didn't come out very well, but this is an article in Visit Canton about the Massillon Museum's blind spot exhibit a few years ago. And actually, just this morning, I haven't told them, I don't know if they're on here, but I got a call from the Independent newspaper in Canton, Massillon, that's doing a story about their new sensory-friendly room that they've built. So people want to know about this information. It's a good story, and it's really opening your doors to the community. There are a couple of different event calendars that you can put your, you know, if you're doing ASL interpretive performance or sensory friendly. These are the OCALI, the Ohio Center for Autism and Low Incidence, has an event calendar and a resource database. So people with disabilities go there to look for, you know, for a dentist or for other types of therapies. And now there's an arts specific section on here where you can post your information, going to where people with disabilities are. The other one that I know of is redtreehouse.org, where you post opportunities. These are also good places to look and search around and see if there looks like there could be a new partner for you or somewhere that you want to send your information to. And then finally, Google yourself. Google is trying to tag accessible places so that when people are looking for, you know, it will say whether or not a space is accessible or a building is accessible, so you can go in and tag yourself. I don't think we have it yet in Columbus or in Ohio, but there are cities where in New York and Boston where they have actually begun to map wheelchair accessible routes. So if you're, you know, I want to get from here to here using a car or a bus or walking, there's a subsection in there that you can go to for a wheelchair accessible route. And that's pretty cool because you don't necessarily want to, you know, roll your wheelchair under an underpass or no sidewalk, or lots of roads, their sidewalks stop. So this is a pretty neat thing. And then finally, you've all hung out for 2 minutes already, or you've taken off, but take stock of what you're doing, make a plan. Nobody expects you to do everything all at once. Baby steps are fine. Every step matters. Set yourself some short, medium, and long-term goals. Give yourself a budget, think about it, look how much it costs to print a 5x7 brochure instead of a 4x6, or postcard instead of a 4x6 postcard. Implement what you're doing, evaluate it, revise, and just keep going, because there's no perfect, there's only continuing to try, and efforts are noticed. So I certainly wish you good luck. I'll take any questions if you have them, or you can email me anytime, and I'm happy to dialogue with you a little bit about your specific questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Erin. First, I just wanted to let you know Massillon Museum is with us in the webinar today. So they're glad that they reached out about the sensory room. We do have a question. Somebody is asking, they host an annual convention that brings in roughly 20,000 attendees, and they want to make sure that everyone has a great experience. And they recently had an attendee who's deaf ask if they could have interpreters available. They say the tricky part is we have over 6,000 events at our show. Some run in 3 to 5 hour segments for 5 days, and we're not sure how to start looking into bringing in these accommodations. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, so first of all, wow, that's a big one. All right, good, good luck every year with that. And that's a lot of different people with different needs, absolutely. I do have a few different resources about planning for accessible meetings and events. Everything from, making sure speakers use microphones to, if it's an outdoor event, that kind of stuff. So I'd be happy to share that with you, or it might even be on our website under cultural accessibility. I would say for that, if it's, so you want to do your research in advance to know your local ASL providers. You can get in touch with them in advance and try to, you can get their rate sheets, their process for requesting them, that kind of stuff, so you know what to expect. How soon do you need to book them? If it's an evening or a weekend event, it's possible that it will be more expensive on the evening and weekends. Depending on how long the engagement is, it might actually require more than one ASL interpreter because I'm exhausted from talking for 60 minutes straight. And so basically an interpreter is talking for, time on end, so they will switch between two people. I think, if I had one person that asked for an ASL interpreter, then I would have that ASL interpreter travel with the person who requested the accommodation. Because that's who needs it, right? So you'll want to sort of, if you're bringing in an interpreter, you want to have them placed near the speakers so that they're reflecting what's happening. You might need to do some small reservations of seating so that they can be seated towards the front. If it's more than one person that asks for that accommodation and they don't expect to take all of the same sessions, I would have some conversations with your local ASL providers about the best way to go about that, or to have some conversations with different people about, or with the person making the request. Is there anything specific that you need? Sometimes people who use ASL interpreters actually have interpreters that they like, that they know and that they like. So maybe, the provider that you're using, you can request, that Katie be your interpreter. She was personally requested by the attendee. But I would just keep that dialog box open and do your research in advance so you're not scrambling for it at the last minute and putting that. Clearly, you're putting some sort of accommodation request line in your registration material, since hopefully somebody's asking you in advance for this. Those are my main thoughts.
Great. I think that was really helpful. It's definitely a huge undertaking. It's helpful to kind of have some kind of a launching point where to start. So I think that was really helpful information. I think we're coming up on time here. So did you have anything else you wanted to add, Erin, or you think we got everything?
I would just say thank you very much for making this something that you want to do and are interested to do. And I think that you will find that you do get returns on your investment, and you will get people that are having great experiences in your spaces because of the efforts that you're making. And if something doesn't go exactly as planned, do not be discouraged. Learn from it and try again next time. But thanks for all that you're doing.
Great. Well, then I think that does it for today's presentation. Thanks again, Erin, for all of the helpful tips. And thank you to everyone for listening in. Stay tuned to our Facebook and Twitter accounts for information on February's webinar, and have a great weekend. Thank you.